BBC Radio Derby and David Clowes have done an exclusive interview, and in this video I'm going to be talking through a range of talking points from that interview, ranging from Paul Warne's doubters to potential investment in the future, a potential transfer for Ebou Adams, and the championship budget. Now, there's a lot of things in this topic that I'm going to preface sort of what he says. If you want to go and check it out, it's on BBC Sounds. You'll be able to go and see it from yesterday. So it's one of those interviews for me where I think David Clowes came across really, really well. I'm really impressed with some of the things he said, and there's a lot of stuff which I think really makes a lot of sense for the future of the club. Now, for me, I think I've picked out quite a few talking points throughout the video. I'll give you the timestamp between each talking point so that you can go and listen if you want to go and listen to what he said. I would put it in, but I don't want to risk any copyright or anything like that. So yeah, let's get straight into it. But before we do get into it, if you have not done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below or in this top corner to stay tuned for all of my latest Derby County and EFL Championship and League One content that's going to be heading your way over the course of the next season. Obviously, there's a lot going on with Derby County and transfers, so make sure you do stay tuned to all of those videos, as well as the previews and predictions for both Championship and League One. So starting off with the first talking point comes at time 18:07, so that's 6:07, so it's about 7 minutes into the programme on BBC Sounds. And he started talking about how he stood by Paul Warne despite the poor start last season, how he dealt with the doubters, and obviously the public display which happened, I believe it was after the Stevenage game, and he goes on to talk about Derby's history of being poor starters. Now, for me, back in the time when he was backing Paul Warne, opinions were very different, including my own. I felt as if Paul Warne probably wasn't the right man for the job. I do agree with stability and the club needing stability, and it is something that has been cried out for years and years as Derby County fans. But I think at that moment in time, there was a lot of reason for... There was a lot of reasons for why the fans felt that way. We ended the season on a slump. We started the season on a slump. It wasn't particularly a great start. Now, we did eventually hit some form, don't get me wrong, and obviously ended up getting promoted. So he did the right thing by standing by, and would we have still got promoted with another manager? We will never know. Now, the public display after the game, I think, is the absolute right thing to do for him. If he's going to back his man, go and make that public, make it known to everybody that you're going to do that, and I think that is what he did, and that's sort of what he was explaining, and I felt he wasn't wrong in doing that if that's what he wanted to do. Now, he then went on to talk about our history of being poor starters, went back to the Jim Smith season, which obviously you probably might know, might not know. I'm too young to know about that season, but obviously he went on about how we've started some season with 4 wins on the trot and ended up finishing mid-table. We started some seasons with 2 or 3 losses and ended up getting promotions. So I kind of get where he's coming from, but ultimately I think the aim should be start well, finish well. If you're going to have a slump, have it around Christmas, if not before then. But hey-ho, I get his point for a lot of those. Then at around 18:10, so 10 minutes into the show, he starts talking about potential investment and Stephen Pearce in his job role. Now, I do believe that investment is something which David Clowes will be looking out for. 100% is going to be something that's on the table, and it's definitely something which he cannot turn down if we do get that opportunity. Obviously, it has to be the right investment for the club, and it's got to be right for David Clowes as well to take a little bit of a less percentage. Obviously, sole owner of the club, and obviously sole owner of the stadium. So he then went on to talk about Stephen Pearce and how he's doing an excellent job. And I personally, in my opinion, I do think fans should lay off him a little bit. I think in the past 2 years, I think he's shown that he is capable of running this club to a really good level. Obviously, it's going to be interesting to see how that does progress now into the Championship and going forward. But for me, I think fans should back off Stephen Pearce a little bit. He's not going anywhere. I think David Clowes has made that abundantly clear to the fans of the club on numerous occasions in a couple of interviews now. So I think that's one which the fans just need to back off a bit. David Clowes is happy with his job. Paul Warne seems to be happy with what he's doing, so I'm happy with what's going on. Then obviously went on to talk about the championship about a minute or so after this, and was discussing the massive improvement since we left 2 years ago. And then went on to talk about budgets and things like that. Now, if you have not done so already, make sure you smash that subscribe button down below, hit the like button as well, to stay tuned for all of my latest Derby County, EFL Championship and League One content heading your way this season. Let me know your thoughts on the interview between Dom Dietrich and David Clowes down in the comment section. I'm really interested to see if they do another one with Paul Warne heading into the season. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what videos you want to see heading up to the first friendly game and throughout pre-season. To stay tuned with everything that's going on with Derby County. Obviously, James Collins' deal looks to be getting re-signed, but I'm going to let you now get back to the video. I agree, but also disagree with the champ massively improving. Now, I think the difference that we've seen is the low levels of League One. Now, I'm not saying League One is a low-quality league. I think there's a lot of quality in the division, but there's so many different ways to play football in that league, and sort of you have to be a bit rugged and a bit tough to get out of League One, whereas in the Championship you can play free-flowing football. Like, there's a lot more going on in the Championship. It's more of a tactical battle than a physical one, whereas I think in League One, on occasion, some games are more physical than tactical, or like technical in that sort of space. I think a lot of you may agree with me on that. A lot of you may not. A lot of you may think I'm being stupid, but that's just my personal opinion. Obviously, as I mentioned, he went on to talk about the budget. He says it's a good budget for the Championship. He thinks we'll be competitive. Now, what is classed as competitive? Because obviously some people will see competitive as top six. Some people may see it as automatic promotion. Now, in my opinion, I think we need to see competitive in this context as mid-table. And I do think we should be able to get there. Now, obviously, I don't know budgets, but I think there's plenty of players out there for us to build a fairly decent mid-table side, and we'll just have to see what happens. Obviously, discussed aiming as high as possible and does not want to overspend within that same section, which I think sort of links in with the Championship budget and things like that, the pots. Which Derby worked with in League One. Will they be continuing with that? Didn't really give a proper answer when that question was asked, but I felt as if he gave some really good answers within this section, talking about the Championship and the Championship budgets, and we'll just have to see how that then goes on. Dom then asked about parachute payments at about 18:13, so 30 minutes into the programme, to which David Clowes was very abrupt in his opinion of that he does not agree with parachute payments, and I do completely agree with him. I think ultimately, all they do is benefit those sides coming down, when I think ultimately you should have to make sacrifices if you get relegated. You look at sides coming down from the Championship to League One, they don't get anything similar. So for me, I'm not a fan of parachute payments, so I agree with David Clowes on that one. He then said how it makes it difficult for the league, and I do completely agree with that, but obviously it's got to work with it, because you've got no choice either way. I'm pretty sure this is one of the arguments that Mel Morris had with the EFL before he went down the route of X, Y and Z amortisation. Now, I don't think David Clowes is going to go down those routes, but obviously that's something which is now discussed. And he then went on to discuss Luton Town as a key example of how things can be done on a low budget if the correct systems are in place behind the scenes. And I think that's a really, really good way to look at things. You can obviously then look at the likes of Brentford and Brighton, and I think Crystal Palace have moved into more data recently as well, which I think is something which Derby should be looking into, and how that can help with not only performances on the pitch, but also transfers off it, and the staff that you bring in, any future potential managers in the future. So completely agree with the things he's doing there. Dom Dietrich then asked him a question about Ebou Adams, and I think his answer was exactly what I'd anticipate. Basically just went on to say that he's a Cardiff City player, did a really good job when he was with us, but said that the club are looking at multiple players in multiple different positions, and we'll have to see what happens. I personally don't think he really answered Dom's question, but I think it was sort of the exact answer that Dom was expecting. For me, on Ebou Adams. I personally wouldn't want to pay more than £600,000-700,000 for him. I believe he's 28 years old, 29 years old now, and as much as he was incredible for us in League One, we don't really have a sample of him in the Championship, and he hasn't really played many minutes in the Championship. I believe only about 300 during his time at Cardiff. So for me, I think it's one of those where obviously it's not Ebou's fault himself, but he's in a bit of a situation where I think Cardiff have a year and then an option on his contract, so it sort of puts it in a position where they're probably going to be asking for maybe £1.5 million. And for me, I just think we can probably get better and younger, or more potential and younger, obviously, for similar costs or maybe a little bit more. So I think that's something we should be looking at. Obviously, there's a lot of talk around Kenzo, the Dutch midfielder, about 22 years of age. I don't believe they're the same type of player, but obviously we're going to be looking in those markets now, which I think is really good. So for me, with Ebou Adams, it's just one of those. If it happens, it happens. But I'm hoping that the club don't overpay on Ebou because of how good he was last season. He was brilliant, amazing, really happy that he helped get us promoted, and I do think if we had him from the start of the season, like David Clowes said, I do think we would have gone up. But it's just, I do think we would have got the title, but it's just one of those for me where I don't want to overspend based on the fact he helped us get promoted, because it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to help us stay in the Championship. So it's just one of those. About 18-16 in the programme, so 6 minutes in, he went on to talk about the new Sporting Intelligence Unit, about the Mo Babbitt and Ed Smith arrivals, and told us to overlook the cricket impasse. They're working with data. And he discussed how teams in the PL have gone similar. He's not named them, and it's worked really well, and it's sort of a long-term thing rather than short, instant progress. Now, for me, I'm completely happy to overlook the cricket past on these people, because I do understand that working with data, anybody can work with data, whether it's in motorsport, whether it's rugby, basketball, cricket, or football. Like, data is data. So long as you can pinpoint the important metrics and where things need to line up, which you can do so long as there's one football-related person within the board, essentially. So for me, I think it's definitely a move in the right direction. Working with all this data in the Sports Intelligence Unit, which is what they've started this season. Obviously, teams in the Premier League doing it. I think we can probably work out who they are. I bet it's probably Brighton, Brentford, Luton. I know they're not in the Premier League anymore, but I bet they're one with something similar. Probably Crystal Palace as well. So for me, obviously, this has to be a long-term thing, which Clowes said himself, because if you go in short-term, you're not going to get the long-term benefits, and this will then eventually aid the academy and how that progresses. Obviously, bringing in players at a younger age with certain metrics and helping our players develop towards certain metrics is obviously something that is going to be really important as well for their future careers. Now, if we then go on to about 2.5 minutes later, he goes on to talk about Amari Kellyman's move during administration, and then his move to Chelsea, which obviously at the time of recording the interview with Dom Dietrich had not happened. Now, obviously wouldn't disclose the percentage that Derby County have as a sell-on, but did confirm there is one. We heard about that a couple of days ago. The 25% was shut down, though, from what I'm aware. So if we are to say that Derby probably have a 15% sell-on clause as per the deal, obviously we'll have to... Well, we'll never truly know what the percentage is, I don't think, unless they end up saying. But I think with 15%, we get around just over £2.5 million, just under 3 million. It's sort of in that bracket, which obviously is going to be absolutely massive. And David Clowes says that will be put towards obviously running costs and the budget of the club, which I think could be massive. If you just put £1 million into the budget, it adds a lot, in my opinion. Obviously, £1 million is quite a lot of money for Derby County, who have spent £300,000 on transfer fees since 2020, I think it is now. So I think that's absolutely a massive deal for Derby County to benefit out of that sell-on. Obviously, I'd love to know about Delap. What's his first name? Delap. Well, yeah, I'd love to know about Delap. If his sell-on clause, if we've still got it. Obviously, there was a couple of clauses sold during administration. I'm not sure if Delap's was sold. Obviously, there's also Cade Gordon as well, but I can't see him being sold anytime soon by Liverpool because he's obviously suffered from a few injuries recently. So he won't be giving us any help over this transfer window. So he then went on to discuss TV deals, how the new TV deal is in the Championship is sizable and massively helpful for the club, helps with running costs and budgets. Now, talking about TV deals, I believe when we was in administration, it was quoted as around £7 to £8 million as to how that would help the club, which was one of the reasons why they wanted to keep hold of as many players as possible, because that then would have helped to sell the club, because obviously you've got a guaranteed 7 to 8 million coming in to help the new prospective owner at the time. So for me, I believe there's a new deal, a TV deal now, which is obviously one of the reasons why I think we have 16 games on Sky up until December, which is absolutely crazy. I believe that's just Derby as well, by the way. So it's one of those where I believe the new deal will probably have increased that figure, probably to 10 to 12 million pounds per club. But obviously, David Clowes gave no official figure, probably not allowed to in that respect for legal matters. So I think that's a very, very good situation for Derby to look at. Obviously, that's something which I mentioned a while ago. I think I mentioned it in one of my videos a while ago about how TV deals can be effective, and obviously this one is absolutely massive for Derby County and will obviously help running costs, because obviously I think the academy is something like £12 million a year, so that's essentially that covered with a TV deal. So he then went on after talking about those deals to sort of say that we've not seen a pure Paul Warne side due to injuries, transfer restrictions and things like that, and went on to suggest 2 more windows until we truly see that. Now, in my opinion, I think we have started to see a Paul Warne side. It started off not very well this season in that 3-back formation, but then towards the back end of the season, I think we really saw a tough, percentage played, energetic team. Now, obviously the addition of Ebou Adams helped, Liam Thompson coming into midfield helped. I think Dwight Gale was absolutely massive in helping that situation as well. Obviously James Collins as well, ratting about like he does. But for me, I don't necessarily disagree. There's going to be 2 more windows until it's truly a Paul Warne side. Obviously, there's still players at the club which he didn't necessarily have decisions on, and he's sort of got to keep a core so that we don't have to bring in too many players, because obviously that then hinders the future. So for me, I don't necessarily disagree about the 2 windows. I think these next 2 windows are definitely going to be massively influential to seeing Paul Warne's style and Paul Warne's system, but I do think we've seen it already. So it's going to be interesting to see how that does develop going into this season, if David Clowes believes that this isn't the final form of Paul Warne. So let's see what happens with that. He then went on to discuss the abroad scouting trips from Paul Warne and his staff. And for me, and for David Clowes, it's absolutely massive, and he wants to do it more, which I believe is completely fine. And he discussed the expense of English players. Now, for me, I think some of the players we've been linked with this summer already shows how that scouting trip is working. Obviously, you've got Matt Ryan, who's been linked, Kenzo, who's been linked both from AZ Alkmaar, which is in Holland, one of the places where they're supposed to have gone to. And he then obviously discussed how he enjoys that Warne and his team have that philosophy of going to watch players live to get that feeling. And I also agree. I think that's massively pivotal to signing a player. I think you have to see them perform in person, not just on clips, because I think clips can be very, if not clipped correctly, they can show something completely different to what actually happened. I think as much as you can say, oh, that player gave the ball away from this 5-second clip, if you make it 10 seconds, why did he give the ball away? How did he receive the ball? How did he play the ball? What was the reason? And I think these are some of the things which Paul Warne and his staff will definitely be looking at. And it's something they'll be looking at within their own squad as well. So that's something which I think is absolutely massive. He then sort of closed out at about 28, 29 minutes in, basically going on about how it feels like nothing's happening from outside, but there is lots of things going on behind the scenes to improve the club, including transfers and stuff like that. And for me, I completely agree that fans need reassuring with this. There's a lot of people, obviously, in a fan base of a football club, not just Derby County, but also plenty of clubs across the country and across the world who don't really understand the goings off behind the scenes. Obviously, yes, there's been abundance of links to players this off-season, and I think it's probably been one of the busiest off-seasons we've had in a while in regards to links, and I think that's obviously massively down to going into the Championship, but also I think we've lost 11, 12 players because of loans, contracts expiring and things like that. So obviously that's something which a lot of fans need to take into account. Me personally, I understand how it works. There's lots going off behind the scenes. Derby are probably talking to 30, 40 players right now, and there'll be 10 that they want as first choice, there'll be 10 that are second choice, 10 that are third choice, and they'll be having these conversations with players and clubs to see if they're the right fit. There might be someone who they consider third choice who, when discussing with them and the club, it actually works out that they end up being our first choice because personality suits, the play style suits, what the player wants to do in their future obviously suits. So it's one of those where you can have someone considered as a C choice, but ultimately ends up being A choice because of conversations that happen along the way. And obviously, we've heard from Ben Osborne that he was looking around I think he said in May at the end of his interview. So it's massively important that fans keep their heads when it comes to like transfers and things like that. Obviously, we've got a lot of talk going on at the moment about Kenzo, about Jerry Yates and about Caden Jackson. And then there's obviously been talk tonight about James Collins' new contract. So apparently that's done, but we have no official confirmation from the club as of recording this video at 9 o'clock on the 1st of July. So, yeah, that is really a roundup of everything David Clowes has had to say. I think he's definitely said like a lot of really, really good stuff. I'm really intrigued about how the SIU is going to work, the Sporting Intelligence Unit. I think that can be massively, massively impressive going into next season. I think over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, that could massively help us. Obviously, there's a lot of other things to talk about as well with the investment and things like that. I think David Clowes mentioned the Brighton owner when talking about that, and I think it really spoke a lot about how he sees the future and how he knows that he's probably going to need investment in order to push the club forward. So it'll be interesting to see how that one goes. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you listened to it, let me know your thoughts as well. What do you think about what David Clowes had to say? I think it's been really interesting, but make sure you do like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're trying to hit 1,000 by the end of this year, so please help me to that goal. I think we're on 805 as I'm recording this video, so please help me by hitting that subscribe button, smash the like button, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll catch you in my next video. Make sure to go and find me on TikTok, pictured here, and Twitter, pictured here. These are the places where I'll keep you all up to date with all my upcoming videos and my thoughts and feelings around the Formula 1 and football weekend.